Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chavav, volume 26, the second Sicha for Parshas Vayakhel. This Sicha will explain the greatness of the donation of the women specifically for the contributions of building the Mishkan over that of the men. Also will explain how the building of the Mishkan is greater even than what happened at Mount Sinai, the receiving of the Torah, and a wonderful directive for all of us, a practical one in our day-to-day lives. As an introduction, just to familiarize ourselves with some of the concepts that we mentioned in the Sicha, so we can better flow through the Sicha. So we know when it came to the building of the Mishkan, if you look in Parshas Truma, that we read several weeks ago, so it says that there were 3 Trumais, there were 3 offerings. First, there was the half shekel, that went for the sockets, the silver base of the tabernacle. Then there was the half shekel that they had to give also for the communal offerings. That means they all had to be collectively involved, collectively contributing together equally, so they all have an equal part in the offerings. And then there was the voluntary gifts that they all gave, all of the various donations of the various items, gold, silver, copper, wood, materials, and so on and so forth. Another thing to be familiar with is that typically in the Torah, when Hashem gives a commandment, it says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe. Hashem spoke to Moshe and he says, Daber al Bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. Typically this means that he didn't gather all the Jews together. Rather, he spoke to the heads of the people. He spoke to the elders, to those who are in charge, those who are designated with the task of disseminating the teachings to the people and see to it that it's implemented. However, in some special occasions throughout the Torah, we find that it says that Moshe gathered as kol adas b'nei Yisrael, the entire Jewish congregation, the entire community, which means then that not only did he speak to the elders, he spoke to not only to the men, but also they gathered the women and even the children. Another thing to be familiar with is, in general, Ish and Isha, a man and a woman. This serves as a metaphor for Hashem and Knesset Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael, Hashem and the body of the children of Israel, of the Jewish people. In fact, if you look in the book of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, there the entire book basically is all about the courtship and later the marriage and the relationship, so to speak. It's a parable for our relationship with Hashem. Hashem is considered to be the Ish, who is the Mashpia, the giver, the influencer, and we are considered the Isha, the Mikabel, the recipient, the one who is being influenced, the one who is receiving the emanations from Hashem. One more thing, when Hashem gave the Torah, we find that Hashem said to Moshe, Koi soymar leveis Yaakov, so you should say to the house of Jacob, the house of Yaakov, V'saged livnei Yisrael, and you should tell to the people, to the children of Israel. The sages tell us that Beis Yaakov, the house of Jacob, this refers to the women, that he was supposed to not only say it first to the women, but say it to them in a manner of soymar, in a soft manner. In other words, they didn't need much prodding. He should tell it to them. For them, it was natural. For them, it was instinctive to receive the Torah. However, when it came to the men, there it had to be, first of all, it was after the women, and also it was saged, in a very more stern and more stricter manner, that he had to give it over to them because they needed the extra prodding, the extra push. Let's get into the Sicha. So on the verse in which Moshe tells the Yidden, he tells the Bnei Yisrael, Hashem's command regarding the building of the Mishkan, regarding the contributions and later the building of the Mishkan, which has already been recorded in the Torah in Parshas Truma. Look in chapter 35, verse 5. It says as follows, Kechu me'itchem teruma laHashem. Take from within you a offering to Hashem. Koil nediv liboy. Everyone who has generosity in the heart, Yivieha es trumas Hashem, will bring the offering of Hashem. So some of the commentaries, especially the Klei Yakar, ask the following question. The beginning of the verse and the end of the verse seem to be contradictory. Because the beginning of the verse says, Khu, you shall take. This is almost like a command. This is telling the authorities, you could actually collect it. You can even take it by force. In other words, this is an imperative. This is an obligation. Whereas the end of the verse stresses that it has to come from the people. It has to come from the goodness of their hearts. It has to come from them. They shall bring it. Not that you should take it. They shall offer it. They shall bring it. So what is the answer? The answer is that there's no contradiction here. The beginning of the verse is referring to the half shekels, that which was mandatory. We mentioned in the introduction, that which was mandatory, that they had to bring for the foundation of the Mishkan. That was Yikhu, they shall take. That could have even been enforced, and it could have been seized from the person because they have an absolute obligation to give it. However, the end of the verse is talking about all the other items in the Mishkan, that which had to come from the goodness of one's heart, that which came from one's own personal discretion, however they decided and what they decided to give. Okay, that makes sense. However, the question is, why is it that only over here in Parshas Vayakhel does he mention this idea that there is the contribution that comes from the goodness of the heart, kol nediv liba yivayena, that all those who have the goodness of their heart, they have the willingness to contribute, they should bring it. But this is not mentioned in the commandment that Hashem gave to Moshe in Parshas Terumah. And it's obvious that over there, it's obvious that Moshe Rabbeinu would not make up anything on his own. In other words, if Hashem didn't say it to him, if Hashem never mentioned to him the idea of the contribution that has to come from the goodness, from the willingness of the heart, then Moshe wouldn't mention it here. That's obvious. But why is it that over here it's mentioned explicitly, whereas there in Parshas Terumah it is not? It is hinted, but it is not mentioned explicitly. Yes, there is a reference to all kinds of contributions, both the mandatory and the ones that they gave from the willingness of the heart. However, it's not mentioned explicitly. The question is, why? Another difference between, if we really put them together, we compare Parshas Terumah, again, where Hashem gave the initial commandment to Moshe regarding the building of the Mishkan, and our Parsha, where Moshe now delivers it to the people, there's also another very stark contrast. And that is, that over there in Parshas Terumah it says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, where b'nei actually is masculine. And that's why typically it's a reference specifically to the men, and as we said in the introduction, even more specifically, not to all the men, but those who are in charge of the people, who are the elders from amongst the men. And over here, rather, what does it say? Daber Vayakhel Moshe es kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Moshe gathered, which that in itself means he gathered all the people, but then it specifies specifically, it underscores the fact that it was kol adas b'nei Yisrael. That was the entirety of the Jewish people, meaning men and women. Why the difference? Why over there was it only to men, and over here women are not only included, but they're highlighted in the sense that they're mentioned? The answer is as follows. What is the whole purpose? What is the whole idea of the building of the Mishkan? It was a kapara, an atonement for the terrible sin of the golden calf. As Rashi says in next week's parsha, it refers to the Mishkan as Mishkan ha'edus, the Mishkan of the testimony. What kind of testimony it is? So Rashi says that it's Edus liYisrael. The Mishkan itself, the existence of the Mishkan, serves as a testimony to the Jewish people that Hashem had forgiven them for the terrible sin of the golden calf, and that He chose to dwell amongst them, to shine His, to dwell His Shekhinah, His presence amongst them. So that is what the Mishkan is for, to serve as an atonement for the golden calf, for the sin of the golden calf. How did the Bnei Yisrael express their true, deep regret for having committed this terrible sin? Through the building of the Mishkan. How exactly? How is it expressed through the building of the Mishkan? By virtue of the fact that they came and they donated their gold and all their precious and most valuable things. They took their gold and donated it for what? Instead of giving it like they did in the past, wrongfully, erroneously, they gave it for the golden calf. Here they went ahead and they gave it for the purpose of building the Mishkan. Not only did they give it, but they gave it willingly, excitedly, and enthusiastically. In fact, they gave it with such zrizus, with such swiftness and agility, that to the point that later it says, that there's too much. The people who were in charge came to Moshe and they said, listen, the people are bringing too much. There was such an eagerness, such excitement on behalf of the people to offer to the building of the Mishkan, that their contributions became overwhelming. So even though you could argue that when it came to giving the half shekel, which like we said was mandatory, there too perhaps there was a zrizus, there was an excitement and a swiftness, but it's still inherently different. You see, when one is fulfilling an obligation and one expresses excitement, that is just saying that one has a excitement, one has great fervor in doing what they are obligated to do, in doing what they have to do, in doing what's being imposed upon them, an imperative that they must do. But it does not express true and absolute remorse, which is coming from their very innards, from their very inside, from the very deep of their soul. But when they gave for the building of the Mishkan, and they contributed in such, first of all, without a direct commandment, they weren't told that they have to give, they said you could give. Everybody is welcome to give. That's what they were told. Moreover, they were even though they were told that they could give, which perhaps is an encouragement for them to give, but they weren't told how much they have to give. There was no a minimum and there was no maximum amount that they had to give. And what did they do? They gave and they gave and they gave, and they did it all with swiftness and excitement. This is the ultimate indication. This great excitement is an indication of their deep desire to come back to Hashem, that it's coming from the depth of their soul. And therefore, when it comes to Parshas Truma, Hashem says, Tikhu es trumasi, you shall take my Truma. Taking, meaning collecting, only applies to an actual command. When there is an imperative, when there is a obligation to give, which was the case in the half shekels, then you can tell the appointees, you tell the people in charge, the treasurers, you have to collect, you should collect. However, over here, the discussion is Moshe is telling them that you could give, you have the opportunity to give. That is the difference between Vayakhel and Truma. And that's why over here it says only those who desire to give shall bring it. In other words, no one can collect it from you. No one can take it from you. Yes, they're commanded to take it when you bring it, but inherently it's your bringing that makes it happen. Now this idea of giving this is prudent not only regarding the aspect of forgiveness of the Chet HaEgel, of the sin of the golden calf, but rather the Rebbe introduces another inyan here, another idea, a deeper idea, take it a step further, that in regards to the level of the presence of God's Shekhinah, of the dwelling of God's presence in the Mishkan, also it has a great impact and difference, the fact that they brought it from their own desire. They brought it on their own initiative, so to speak. They were given the green light and they went with it on their own. It came from the depth of their soul. What is the idea? You see, by Matan Torah, by the giving of the Torah by Mount Sinai, there was a tremendous revelation. Such a great revelation that the whole world shook. There were thunders, there were lightning, it was tremendous. It was outstanding. The greatest level of holiness was revealed to them. And to the extent that they all became like new beings. As it says, Poskazu Hamosam, that all the filth from the original sin just evaporated. They became like brand new beings, total reset. However, what happened not too soon after that? Unfortunately, as we know, not only was there a possibility for it, not only was there an opening for it, but it actually happened that they worshipped the golden calf. They brought back upon themselves not only sin, but the worst of the sins that there could be. And in fact, we see also an example for this from the mountain itself. While Hashem was revealing himself on the mountain, it says nobody should even touch the mountain. Nobody should come close. But right after Hashem's presence went away from the mountain, it says as it lifts up from the mountain and there will no longer be fire and cloud and darkness and the thunder and lightning, then anybody can go up, anybody can touch the mountain. Why? Because you see what happened is the influence, the inspiration the inspiration came from above. It was imposed upon them. It was given to them. It was brought down to them. It came onto them. And therefore the influence was a limited one. Whereas by the Mishkan, in contrast, when they gave the contributions, this came from within them. This came from them. And therefore, the impact of it was that the dwelling of the Shekhinah was far greater, more impactful, and had a permanence. And also now we can appreciate the difference between Parshas Teruma and Parshas Vayakhel, the beginning of the commandment of Hashem to Moshe, and now how Moshe transmits it to Bnei Yisrael. Over there it says that you should take from every man. It says, Me'ez kol ish asher yidvenu liboy, that you take it from every man. The emphasis is on the men. Over here, however, there's an emphasis and inclusion of the women. Because it's, as we said, it says, kol nediv liboy, anybody who offers from their heart. Anybody who offers from the heart means also women. And as we said already, he gathered the entire congregation. That's also women. And as we see in actuality, not only did the women also participate, but in fact, they were the leading participants. Their contribution to the Mishkan was in such a manner that they excelled even more than the men. Two examples for this. The Medrash tells us that they gave the best of their jewelry away. They gave the best of their jewelry and ornaments. They gave to be melted down in order to have gold for the Mishkan. Another thing, as we know, when they gave the Izim, it says, they brought the hair, they brought the fur of the goats. It says that they did it in such a manner that was so skilled and required so much attention that they would weave it, they would turn it to thread still while it was on the backs of the goat, which required a tremendous amount of dedication and love for the purpose. So the women excelled even more than the men. But the question is, why is it so? Why is it that over here the women are mentioned, but over there in Parshas Teruma the women are not mentioned? The answer is, as we said in the introduction, Ish ve'isha, a man and a woman, usually serves as a metaphor for mashpia and mekabel. Mashpia and mekabel, the influencer and the recipient, right? The giver and the receiver. And that's why our relationship with Hashem is also metaphorically compared to a husband and a wife, to a chassan and kala. On the surface, it seems that the mashpia, the influencer, the giver, is greater than the mekabel, than the recipient. However, there is a tremendous advantage and greatness in the avoida of the mekabel. And we see it in a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs. It says over there, Shma bini musar avicha. Hear, my son, the musar, the discipline of your father, the al titoish, and do not forsake toiras imecha, the instruction of your mother. The Chazal tell us that when it says musar avicha, the discipline of your father, this is a direct reference to the written Torah. Toiras imecha is Torah shebal peh, the oral law. What is the difference? The written Torah, why is it called the father? Because it's given from above, it's given from the mashpia, and therefore it cannot be altered, it cannot be influenced, and it remains as is. Whereas Torah shebal peh, That is the true and ultimate purpose and idea of the Torah. That is Torah Simecha. That is the Torah of your mother, so to speak. That is the feminine. Why? Because the revelation of Torah Shebaal Peh comes through our hard work. While we learn and excel in it and come up with new novel ideas, with new chidushim, there continuously Torah Shebaal Peh is growing and growing, and more becomes revealed. This is reflected also in a man and woman down here. In actuality, this idea that the woman, the feminine aspect, the mekabel, the avodah, the mekabel is greater. That we see that the women had an extraordinary dedication, more so than the men, to the building of the Mishkan. Also, this is also very, very ardent, very proven in the fact that women, very evident in the fact that women don't require special prodding, special influence, or you want to call it manipulation, in order for them to have faith in Hashem, in order for them to be excited about matters of Judaism. We find that they have it almost innately. It's almost like a natural thing. They have emunah more than the men. We find it throughout. And the Rebbe gives a great example for this, where men need to be told, men need to be prodded, men need to be pushed to do it, whereas women have it naturally, they have it innately. For example, one of the most important mitzvahs, and the first mitzvah that was given to mankind, and that is to be fruitful and multiply. Well, this mitzvah was given to man. A man has an obligation to have children. Now you wonder, a woman doesn't have an obligation to have children. You can't have a children without a woman. Everything happens because and through her. So how come she doesn't have this mitzvah? The answer is she doesn't need this mitzvah to want to have children. She doesn't need to be obligated in order to be encouraged to do it, in order to be inspired to do it. She has it already innately. This is her natural desire. She wants to do it. She wants to make Am Yisrael. She wants to propagate the generations of Am Yisrael. Whereas the man, perhaps without this, wouldn't be so motivated, would need to have, therefore the man needs to have that push, that extra commandment that says you must do what's in your power in order to have children. And this is what the explanation over here is. Over here the emphasis is on, and the novelty is on the givingness of the heart. This is the voluntary giving. And that's why this stood out to them, because the women have it within their hearts. When it comes to Parshas Teruma over there, the emphasis was on what you have to give, what you're told to give. Over here, the emphasis is on what you give willingly and from yourself. This is most exemplified by the women. And also, we see this also expressed in the end of the Parsha, where it says over there that the women brought their shiny mirrors. Their shiny mirrors with which they saved the future, the generations of Am Yisrael. What did they do? They would go while their husbands were totally broken in spirit. They were abused in the fields working for Parai, the harsh labor. And there the women went with the mirrors, and they would beautify themselves and entice their husbands, because they were not in the mood, and they didn't have any desire of continuing to have families. They were broken. They didn't see any future. They didn't see any hope. And when they came and brought these mirrors, initially Moshe was repulsed by them, because it's made for vanity. This is not something which he felt should be connected and become part of such a holy abode for Hashem, Shechina, for Hashem's presence. And Hashem says to him, Elu chavivan lai, I desire these. I love these more than anything else. And this again was in the initiative of the women. This was an innate, natural initiative that came from the women's part, that they had a desire to build Am Yisrael. So the Rebbe says a great and tremendous lesson from this. What do we see? That there are those who think that when it comes to trying to be mekarev people to Yiddishkeit, try to bring people closer to Yiddishkeit, to teach them about Torah and mitzvahs, that the main focus, so they think erroneously, the main focus should be on the men, the heads of the households, thinking that if you get the men closer, the men being the leaders of their homes, they're going to bring with them the women and the children and so on. And what we see from here is no, that we have to put a great emphasis on teaching the women, of course, in a manner that's consistent with halacha, in a manner that's allowed, that is tznius, that is modest and so on. But the emphasis has to be to work with the women. Not, of course, not to neglect the men, but to put much effort into bringing the women closer to Yiddishkeit, because they are the ones at the end who have most of it inside of them. It just has to be brought out, and they will be the ones to influence their homes, their families, and bring the next generation with them.